And welcome to Optimize 2019. I'm Don Armstrong, and joining me now is Lawrence Schwartz, and he's the head marketing guy with Aspen Tech. So I have to ask you, how's it going so far?
Oh, it's going fantastic. We have 1,000 people attending this conference. We have close to 150 sessions from customers, people from all around the world, and great conversations about technology, about how people are thinking of adopting the latest processes that we've developed and software. So fantastic set of conversations. It's been a really good show.
So what impact do you think will be the incoming millennial generation? What will they have on the industry and the way that solutions are designed around them?
No, it's a great question because you see some huge shifts in the workforce. I talked to some of the customers here, and they talk about having 6 different generations that they're working with, everywhere from the millennials all the way up to people who are about to retire. And there's very
Careful how
different
you say that.
That's right. I know, I might resemble that remark myself. But if you look at that whole strata, you've got people who are kind of used to the ways of pencil pushing and kind of taking manual notes, all the way to that new generation that's looking at, well, how can I appify this, right? And I'm used to having a really solid and quick interface. And so very different expectations, very different needs that they have too, and how they respond to the work environment. So you see that shift, and it's interesting because you want to give them the tools, you want to give them the guidance so that it's very comfortable with what they have. But at the same time, if they swipe right in a chemical plant and it's the wrong way, you could have a serious consequence. So we're trying to have conversations with them and how we look at our technology and say, how do we not just simplify it and make it easier to use, but how can we add new technology like cognitive guidance so that people are coming in, instead of it taking them several years to get comfortable with the software, how can they get going really quickly? How can things like artificial intelligence help guide them along and make sure that they can make the best decisions quickly and learn from all the experience that others have brought before them?
So digitization seems to be the big buzzword here. And so how does that really intertwine with both environment and sustainability?
No, it's a big question that you see at this conference. I've seen it at other industry events this past year. I was at CERAWeek, which was here just a few months ago in the same building, and it was a top of mind for a lot of folks. So digitization intersects in a lot of interesting ways, and it can be very helpful to that. So in one example, people are looking at the entire process flow across their plant and thinking, what can I do to reduce energy usage? If you look at a mining operation, when you actually do a lot of drilling, they have to use a lot of water for things to cool things down. Right. So how can you minimize that impact as well? And then there's some really interesting new technologies that come into our space that help with some real problems. And I'll give you an example. I hear people here talking a lot about these new regulations in Europe. There's one regulation called IMO 2020, which is all about how much sulfur do I have in my fuel. That's, it used to be you could take all that high sulfur content, kind of lower quality fuel, give that to the maritime industry. They would take it in a boat offshore and they'd kind of burn this, and people didn't care as much about it many years ago. But of course they do now, and the regulations say, hey, we have to bring the sulfur content from 3.5% down to 0.5%. So what do I do? That's a huge change. It's a huge shift. They don't know how to think about it. And so new technologies can come in and say, well, hey, we can actually monitor that in a very precise level. How much sulfur gets used in different parts of the plant? Where are the opportunities to remove it? And how can I comply with new regulations? So some of these technologies have direct impacts. When you think about reliability, right? And what happens in a plant if something goes down, you can have potentially high emission events when the plant goes down or when it starts back up. And so if you can reduce the number of shutdowns and failures, you can also impact things like that as well.
So this whole conference is very integrated.
Yeah.
And so what are the conversations going on behind the scenes? Let's just take the environment, for instance. How does all of that work, and how do these people get together to discuss such a thing?
Well, I think they look at, where can they learn from each other at this particular conference. So we do have customers here, and we have over 100 different sessions from customers talking about their use cases. And some of them are talking about exactly these situations. How do I reduce, the sulfur in my environment? We have one of our major customers, that's one of their talk tracks. So people can just go and learn from each other. They hear about the technology from us, but it's always great to hear the use cases of others and see what they've done and how they're thinking about it. And also how they think about problems that are hard to solve. Another area around sustainability, for example, is when you think about recycling right? There's only so much you can do with mechanical recycling, where you just grind up all the plastic and try to reconstitute it. But if you can get that grinding down or do it at more of a molecular level and kind of get it to its fundamental components, then you can do full recycling and you can have a much better environmental impact over time. Those are hard problems to solve, and I think having people together to talk and have those conversations is an incredible opportunity from the show.
Digitization from yesterday to today, huge changes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. What kind of changes have taken place and in what period of time?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to hear that some of these technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, the concepts aren't necessarily new. So I heard one of the panelists speaking earlier in the conference about things like self-driving cars, right? Some of that technology was proved out in the 90s. There was a self-driving car all the way from Pittsburgh to San Diego, right?
Yes.
But the issue is, how do you make this much more available, right? And as you've seen in that industry, as the cost of technology has come down, the cost of processing technology, the cost of sensors, and the use of cloud, people are able to kind of democratize that and make it available for many more uses. So that's happening in this industry too. A lot of these concepts have been around for a while, but the technology's catching up. Moore's law is taking effect. The costs of processors are going down. The amount of data available is way up. And then just that appetite for the new generation to think about, how do I combine all these different areas? That's exciting. They're used to building new technologies very easily, and you have so many tools available. I mean, they can go out today and get these fantastic machine learning tools from places like Amazon or places like Google, pull them down, tie it together, use the data, and then when you take our domain expertise and marry it to that, now you can have a real impact.
And it really is about the data, and not only letting the data actually formulate itself, but it still takes a human being to say yes and no.
Yes.
And the ultimate.
Yeah, and certainly getting that buy-in from people, and that's where I think some of these technologies occasionally fail or have problems, is people introduce them into an environment and the operators might not see the same value, or they might have concerns about what's it mean for them, versus the C-level or the executive that says, I understand digitization, I know the benefits, how do I adopt that? You bring that down to the owner of the actual process, and they look at this and say, well, my person is used to going out and doing this inspection route every morning and looking at these different areas and tanks. Maybe technology can come in there and tell them, well, go focus on that one first and not this one today. But they have a process and a system that they are comfortable with, that they know works. And so you got to get that buy-in, and that's part of it. You just can't introduce the technology. You got to get people to play a part of it and understand the value.
So what advice do you have for ensuring new and innovative technologies, such as IoT, et cetera?
Yeah. So what we find for our businesses that really want to adopt this and take advantages, there's a couple of things that really help get them there. One of them is to start small, right, and think about what they can do in a quick basis, where can they get quick wins and show and demonstrate the value to the enterprise. Then they really want to look at finding a good business need as well. So it's great, sometimes an executive comes in and says, hey, I heard about this great machine learning technology at a conference, where can we put it, right? But you really want to start with the business need, right, and kind of really specify that up front, and then look at the technologies that you can put in. Certainly, being able to take this technology, understand the domain and how it's being used. You can use all this machine learning that could tell you, well, something looks funny here and it looks like there's maybe a failure, but if you don't understand how the compressor works, or if that's really a true potential mechanical or vibrational failure or just some noise, you could introduce more confusion into the system than you would otherwise have. So you got to have that domain expertise. And then certainly, as I talked about earlier, keeping in mind those cultural impacts, being very sensitive to what that means. Right. And then the last area that I've heard a lot about the conference, and particularly in the executive track that we've had, is how do you make sure that people are collaborating on this? To get the full benefit of some of these technologies, you have to have people talking to each other, right? And so if you know from one part of your department that I put in technology and I know that this big compressor here that could cost millions of dollars to repair, could set you back for months, if you know that that's going to fail, you could take action within that department, but if you now are able to quickly share that with the planning department, right, that could impact overall, what crude selection they might choose, right, what they want to produce, how they might operate around it. And it might sound very simple, but oftentimes these are in silos and they're not talking to each other because they haven't had to. They haven't had the opportunity to. So those are the things that I think are going to make a lot of these new technology choices very successful for customers.
Very informative. Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the time.
Coming to our display here today.
Absolutely.
Lawrence Schwartz with Aspen Tech at Optimize 2019. I'm Don Armstrong. Have a great day.